The message glowed on my phone screen like a warning light I couldn't ignore. I had already read it 3 times, yet my eyes still lingered on the words as if repetition might somehow change them. I sat alone in my corner office on the 42nd floor of the Salesforce Tower in San Francisco, the afternoon sun fading into a soft haze beyond the glass. From where I sat, the view was breathtaking, the Bay Bridge stretching gracefully across the water, ships crawling slowly toward the port of Oakland, and the familiar fog rolling in from the Pacific, swallowing the skyline one silver cloud at a time. That view cost my company nearly $50,000 a month, but it was worth every cent for moments like this, moments that made me feel both powerful and impossibly small. The message had arrived at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, right in the middle of a board meeting. We were finalizing the acquisition of a competing firm for $340 million, a deal that had taken months of negotiation and endless nights. Surrounded by investment bankers and corporate lawyers, I'd stepped out, expecting a routine text from my father. Instead, I found myself staring at a sentence that would unravel 5 years of quiet sacrifices and hidden truths. Market crashed. You're on your own now. The irony almost made me laugh. My father had no idea how upside down his statement really was. For the past 5 years, I'd been the invisible architect behind what he believed was his successful trust fund. He thought he'd rebuilt our family's finances through smart investments, but the truth was far different. I had been the one quietly depositing money, shielding our family from collapse, and letting him take credit for it all. I leaned back in my leather chair, letting the weight of that truth settle over me. It wasn't anger I felt, it was exhaustion. I picked up my office phone and dialed Marcus Chin, my personal banker at Wells Fargo Private Wealth Management. Marcus had managed my accounts for 3 years, ever since my company, Avalon Digital, had crossed the billion-dollar valuation mark. He answered immediately, his tone smooth and professional. "Elena, I saw the market dip today. I trust your portfolio hasn't caused you concern, your diversification strategies held strong." "Actually, Marcus," I replied, my voice calm but deliberate. "I need you to send my father the full statements for the Vasquez Family Trust, the real ones. Every contribution, every source, over the last 5 years." There was a short pause. I could almost hear him raise an eyebrow. "You mean the reports showing you've contributed over $14 million, nearly 90% of the trust's value?" "Yes. Those are the ones." "Elena," his voice softened. "Are you sure about this? You've been very clear about wanting to keep your role private. Sending these will reveal everything." I stared at my father's text again, "You're on your own now." There was something almost poetic in it, like the final line of a play I had been performing for years. "I'm sure," I said quietly. "Send them today, with full details. Every document. Every breakdown." "Understood." When the call ended, I sat still for a long while, the city stretching endlessly below me. I knew what would follow: confusion, disbelief, maybe even anger. But I also knew it was time. My father, Roberto Vasquez, still thought of me as the family disappointment, the daughter who played with computers and never found a stable path. He had no idea that I was the founder and CEO of Avalon Digital, a company that had quietly revolutionized how Fortune 500 corporations managed their data and digital infrastructure. The secret hadn't been born out of malice. It began from love, or perhaps fear. 5 years ago, when I launched Avalon with $50,000 saved from freelance coding gigs, my family was on the verge of financial ruin. Dad's restaurant chain was sinking. Mom's cancer treatments had drained our savings. My younger brother Diego's education was another looming expense we couldn't afford. I had watched them drowning under the weight of bills and hopelessness, and I couldn't stand by and watch. So I built a lie, or maybe a shield. I created a network of shell companies and intermediaries, funneling money back to them in ways that appeared organic. The trust fund my father had once liquidated during the crisis was rebuilt, not through his wisdom, but through my quiet funding. I paid off the restaurant's debts, covered Mom's medical costs, and ensured Diego could finish college without ever worrying about tuition. 4 years, I let my father believe he'd engineered a miraculous financial comeback. I'd sat through countless family dinners where he proudly gave investment advice to cousins and uncles, quoting strategies he thought had saved us. Sometimes I'd smile, sometimes it felt like swallowing fire. But I stayed silent, because his pride mattered more than my recognition. Meanwhile, Avalon grew from a fragile dream into a powerhouse. We became the backbone of the internet for 60% of Fortune 100 companies. With more than 1,200 employees and an IPO on the horizon, our valuation soared to $8 billion. But to my family, I was still Elena, the daughter working from home, scraping by as a freelance programmer. At 3:10 p.m., my phone buzzed again. Diego. My younger brother's voice came through tight with worry. Elena, did you see Dad's message? About the trust? I did, I said evenly. I'm freaking out. That trust has been paying my MBA expenses. I've got 6 months left at Wharton. If it's gone, I'm done. Dad said he was confident in his investments, but maybe he made bad calls. Diego, I said softly, don't worry about your education. It'll be fine. How can you be so calm? This affects you too. You depend on that trust as much as any of us. If only he knew. That safety net he worried about was a drop in my ocean of assets. My stake in Avalon alone was worth over $1.8 billion, while the trust my father guarded so proudly barely crossed $2 million. Things have a way of working out, I said, forcing a gentle tone. Focus on your studies. He sighed. You don't get it. Dad's been so proud of rebuilding that fund. If people find out he lost it. Diego, I interrupted softly. Before you panic, tell me something. What do you actually know about how that trust was rebuilt? He hesitated. Dad said he made smart moves in tech stocks and real estate. He never shared details, but the statements always looked solid. Why do you ask? No reason. Just curious. When I hung up, I turned to my computer and opened my financial dashboard, the one place where truth lived. The numbers filled the screen in cool, digital calm. Avalon Digital, $8.2 billion valuation. Personal properties, $47 million. Investments, another $230 million. I exhaled slowly. My family thought I drove an old Honda Civic because I was frugal. They didn't know that my small apartment was actually a 3,000 square foot penthouse worth over $4 million. I had built my entire life on silence, on protecting the people I loved from the truth that might have bruised their pride. But now, a simple text message had cracked that illusion wide open. And maybe, finally, it was time to stop hiding. That night, I didn't go home right away. The city glittered beneath the velvet sky like 1,000 broken promises, each light flickering with its own secret. My reflection in the glass looked calm, almost serene, but inside, a storm brewed quietly. I poured myself a glass of Cabernet and sank into the sofa by the window, watching the fog swallow the Golden Gate Bridge one tower at a time. It had been years since I'd allowed myself to really feel, what all of this had cost me. The message from my father replayed in my head like a haunting echo, "You're on your own now." I had been on my own for as long as I could remember. My father had been a proud man all his life, too proud to admit when he was wrong, too proud to accept help, even when it was disguised as destiny. I remembered the night 5 years ago when everything had started. He had sat at the kitchen table, head buried in his hands, surrounded by unopened bills and legal notices. The restaurant business was collapsing, the banks were calling in loans. My mother, frail and exhausted from chemotherapy, tried to comfort him, but her voice trembled with fear. I had just finished developing a cybersecurity algorithm for a Fortune 500 client, my first real breakthrough. The $50,000 payment had felt like winning the lottery. I offered to help, but he had looked at me with wounded pride. "Elena," he said, voice hoarse with stubbornness, "we don't need your money. I can fix this. I always do." But he couldn't. And he didn't. Within weeks, everything crumbled. The restaurants were sold at a loss, our family home was mortgaged, and the trust fund, the one my grandparents had built over decades, was drained to pay off debt. Watching him fall apart was like watching a once great ship sink while pretending it could still float. That night, after everyone had gone to sleep, I sat in my childhood room, staring at my laptop screen, tears streaming silently. I made a decision that would change everything. If my father wouldn't accept help, I would give it without him knowing. I created an account in his name, funneled my first earnings into it, and began rebuilding what he thought he had lost. It was easy at first. Small deposits that went unnoticed. But as Avalon grew, so did the numbers, hundreds of thousands, then millions. I built an invisible empire of support beneath his feet. Every time he believed his investment strategy had paid off, it was really me, slipping another quiet fortune into the trust. And tonight, 5 years later, that quiet empire was about to reveal itself. I took another sip of wine and opened my email. Marcus had already sent a confirmation. The statements, full, unedited, and explicit, had been delivered to my father's inbox. Every transaction, every account, every hidden truth. I knew what would happen next. The questions. The disbelief. Maybe even anger. But mostly silence. My father's silence could be louder than any shout. I put my glass down and walked over to the piano near the corner of the living room. It had been a gift from my mother when Avalon first became profitable. For the moments you forget to breathe, she'd said, smiling weakly. I sat down, fingers hovering over the keys, and played a melody I hadn't touched in years, soft, melancholic, and searching. Each note felt like peeling away another layer of armor I'd built around my heart. When my phone rang, the sound startled me. I glanced at the screen. Dad. For a long second, I couldn't bring myself to answer. Then, slowly, I did. Elena. His voice was sharp, clipped. I just received some documents. From your banker. I know. Is this some kind of mistake? His tone wavered between confusion and disbelief. No, it's not. He fell silent. I could hear his breathing, deep, uneven. You mean to tell me, his words trailed off, that all these years, it was you? You rebuilt the trust? Yes, I said quietly. Every cent. Every deposit. It was me. I expected anger. Accusation. But what came next cut far deeper. Why would you humiliate me like this? He said finally, voice trembling. Did you think I couldn't take care of my family? The question stung. No, Dad. I did it because I wanted you to believe you could. I didn't want to take your pride, I just wanted to keep us safe. I never asked for your charity. It wasn't charity, I whispered. It was love. Another long pause. Then, in a tone I hadn't heard from him since childhood, he said, You made me a fool, Elena. To my family. To myself. Tears welled in my eyes. I'm sorry if it felt that way. But I was trying to protect you, all of you. When Mom was sick, when we were drowning, I did what I had to do. His breathing grew heavier. You should have told me. You would have said no, I replied gently. Maybe. But at least it would have been my decision. And just like that, the call ended. No goodbye. No thank you. Just silence. I sat there, phone still pressed to my ear, the city lights blurring behind my tears. I had built a life of success, wealth, and control, yet in that moment, I had never felt smaller. The truth I thought would bring peace had only torn open old wounds. A message buzzed seconds later. It was from Diego. Dad's not talking. He's locked himself in the study. What happened? I typed and deleted 3 replies before settling on the truth. I told him everything. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. Finally, his message came. Elena, he's devastated. But I think deep down, he's proud. He just doesn't know how to show it. I wanted to believe that. I really did. But pride had always been my father's armor, and I had shattered it with one act of truth. I walked to the window and looked out again. The fog had thickened, swallowing the city whole. Somewhere down there, people were celebrating victories, mending heartbreaks, chasing dreams, all unaware that a woman high above them was silently rebuilding herself from the inside out. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the piano until dawn, replaying our conversation in my mind. Every word, every silence, every ache. And as the first light of morning painted the bay in shades of gold and rose, I made another decision, this time, not out of fear or guilt, but out of resolve. I would go home. Not to San Francisco. Not to Avalon. But home. To the house where it all began, to the man who needed to see his daughter not as a savior, but as herself. By the time I reached my childhood home, the California sun had begun its slow descent, painting the sky in strokes of amber and violet. The drive south from San Francisco had felt both endless and fleeting, every mile pulling me closer to a past I had buried under years of ambition. My father's house sat on the outskirts of Palo Alto, the same modest two-story home I grew up in. The front yard still smelled faintly of jasmine, just as it did when my mother was alive. For a moment, I sat in my car, staring at the front door. It looked smaller than I remembered, or maybe I had just spent too long in rooms with glass walls and city views. The curtains were drawn, and the lights inside glowed softly. My heart raced, not from fear, but from the strange weight of stepping back into a world I had once fought so hard to escape. I rang the doorbell once. Twice. Finally, the door opened, and there he was, my father, Roberto Vasquez. He looked older, smaller somehow, the once proud shoulders now curved under invisible burdens. His silver hair was uncombed, and there were dark circles under his eyes. For a second, neither of us spoke. "Elena," he said quietly, his tone unreadable. "Hi, Dad." The air between us felt thick, like something fragile might break if we moved too quickly. He stepped aside without a word, letting me in. The familiar scent of wood polish and brewed coffee wrapped around me like a ghost of my childhood. Everything was exactly the same brown couch, the same clock ticking softly on the wall, the same family photographs that time hadn't dared to touch. But one picture caught my eye, a framed photo of my parents on their wedding day, standing in front of the old restaurant, smiling as if the world belonged to them. My mother's eyes sparkled in that photograph. Seeing her smile again after so long made my throat tighten. "Diego told me you were coming," my father said, his voice breaking the silence. "I wasn't sure you would." "I had to," I replied. "There's too much left unsaid." He nodded slightly and gestured toward the dining table. 2 cups of coffee sat there, one untouched, one half drunk. He had been waiting. We sat across from each other, the air humming with everything we didn't say. I looked through the documents, he began, eyes fixed on the cup between his hands. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. I couldn't understand why my name was on things I didn't control. And then I saw your digital signatures. The transactions. The timelines. I said nothing. I wanted him to keep talking, to pour it all out. "You built all of it," he continued, his voice trembling. "You saved us. You saved me." He finally looked up. "And I never knew." His eyes glistened, not with anger this time, but something far heavier, shame. "Dad," I said softly, "I never wanted to make you feel small. You've always been my strength. I just wanted you to believe we were okay. That you hadn't failed." He gave a hollow laugh. "You don't understand. I built my life around the idea that I could protect my family. When I lost the restaurants, I lost more than money, I lost my identity. And when the trust started growing again, I thought, maybe I'd been given another chance." He took a deep breath. "But now I see that it wasn't a second chance. It was mercy." "It wasn't mercy," I said quickly. "It was gratitude. For everything you gave me. You taught me to work, to build, to fight for something even when it feels impossible. Avalon exists because of you." He stared at me for a long time, as if weighing my words. "Avalon," he repeated slowly. "That's your company?" "Yes." He exhaled, long and slow. "All these years, you let me think you were struggling. That you were barely getting by. And the whole time, you were, this." His voice cracked. "Why didn't you tell me?" I swallowed hard. "Because I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" "That you'd look at me differently. That you'd see me not as your daughter, but as someone who pitied you." He looked away then, eyes fixed on the window. Outside, the last light of sunset bled across the sky, painting his face in gold and shadow. "I suppose pride runs deep in this family," he said quietly. "Too deep, maybe." We sat there in silence, the clock ticking softly between us. I remembered being a little girl, sitting at this same table, helping him count receipts from the restaurant. He would smile at me and say, "Numbers never lie, Mija." But tonight, The numbers had done exactly that. They had hidden the truth until it hurt too much to ignore. Finally, he spoke again. "I owe you an apology." I looked up, startled. "For what?" "For making you think you ever had to protect me. For letting my pride make you carry the burden alone." His voice wavered, but he didn't look away. "You were a better parent to this family than I ever was." My eyes burned. "Don't say that." "It's true." "No, Dad," I said firmly. "You built the foundation. I just repaired the cracks." He smiled faintly, then a small, tired, but genuine smile. "You sound like your mother." Hearing her name again was like a gentle wound reopening. "She believed in you," he said. "Even when I didn't understand what you were doing with those computers, she said, 'One day, Elena will change everything.' I thought she was exaggerating. But she was right." Tears slipped down my cheeks. "I wish she were here to see it." "She is," he said quietly, placing his hand over mine. "In every choice you make, every risk you take, she's there." We sat in silence for a while, our hands still touching. For the first time in years, there was no wall between us, just two people, both scarred by love and silence, finally learning to speak the same language again. As the evening deepened, Diego arrived. His usual cheerful energy was gone, replaced by quiet respect. He hugged me tightly, then our father. For a brief moment, the three of us stood there, a family once fractured, now beginning to mend. Later, as I stepped outside, the night air was cool and still. My father followed me to the porch. "Elena," he said, his voice softer now. "I don't know how to thank you for what you did." "You don't have to," I said, turning toward him. "Just promise me one thing." "What's that?" "Let me stop hiding. Let me be your daughter, not your secret." He nodded slowly. "Deal." As I got into my car, I glanced back through the window. He was still standing there, silhouetted against the light, watching me go, not as a man who had lost his pride, but as a father who had finally found his truth. For the first time in years, I felt light. Free. And yet, somewhere deep inside, I knew this wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning of a new one where truth could finally breathe. The week after visiting my father felt like living in slow motion, every second heavy with reflection, every breath a reminder that something irreversible had changed. 4 years, my world had been built on silence and precision. Now, that silence had broken, and I could almost hear the hum of life rushing back in. Avalon Digital was preparing for its biggest milestone yet, the public announcement of our IPO. Every news outlet in Silicon Valley was waiting for me, Elena Vasquez, the mysterious CEO who had turned a small startup into an $8 billion powerhouse. My team was buzzing with excitement, investors eager, journalists circling like hawks. And for the first time in my career, I felt unafraid of being seen. On the morning of the press conference, I stood in front of the mirror in my office, adjusting the lapel of my charcoal gray suit. The skyline stretched endlessly behind me, sunlight glinting off glass towers like shards of ambition. I looked composed, calm, confident, but beneath that surface, my pulse drummed with quiet purpose. Today wasn't just about Avalon. It was about truth. "Ms. Vasquez." My assistant, Lily, poked her head in. "They're ready for you downstairs." "Thanks, Lily," I said, smiling. As I stepped into the elevator, I thought about my father. We had spoken a few times since that night, short calls, careful words, the kind of tentative rebuilding that takes time. But something fundamental had shifted between us. For the first time, there was honesty. And that honesty gave me courage to do something I'd never dared before, to tell my story in my own voice. The conference hall was packed. Cameras lined the back wall, journalists scribbled notes, and a massive screen displayed Avalon's logo, a silver infinity symbol floating above the words "Building the Future," securely. My co-founders, Ethan and Priya, stood nearby, both smiling proudly. As I stepped up to the podium, the murmurs quieted. Hundreds of eyes turned toward me. I took a slow breath and began. 5 years ago, I said, my voice steady but soft, Avalon Digital began as an idea, a belief that technology could do more than serve business. It could serve people. It could protect what they love. A ripple of nods moved through the crowd. When I founded Avalon, I continued. I was broke, scared, and running on faith. My family had just lost everything. I wanted to build something that would never let that happen again, not to us, not to anyone. For a moment, I paused. This was the part one hadn't planned to say out loud, not in front of cameras. But the truth had been buried too long. My father doesn't know this, I said quietly, but everything I built, every line of code, every dollar earned, started from a promise I made at my mother's bedside, that I'd rebuild our world, even if no one ever knew. The room went completely silent. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate. I never wanted recognition, I said, the words flowing now. I just wanted to make people feel safe again. But somewhere along the way, I realized something important: safety means nothing if it's built on lies. And no success is truly yours until you stand in the light with it. For the first time, I looked directly into the cameras. So today, before we talk about profits or projections, I want to say something personal. I'm Elena Vasquez, daughter of Roberto and Maria Vasquez, a restaurant owner and a teacher. The trust fund that once saved our family wasn't built by smart investments. It was built by love, by work, by sleepless nights and second chances. I hid that truth out of fear. But not anymore. A soft murmur rose from the crowd, the kind that happens when people sense something real. This company was born out of a daughter's promise, I said, voice firm now. And if Avalon stands for anything, it stands for the courage to face truth, no matter how uncomfortable it is. When I finished, the room erupted in applause. Cameras flashed. Journalists whispered to each other. But all I could think of was my father, somewhere at home, probably watching from his old recliner, hearing his daughter speak the truth that once terrified her. After the conference, the story spread like wildfire. Headlines appeared everywhere. CEO reveals the real story behind Avalon's rise. Elena Vasquez, from family crisis to tech empire. The secret heart of Silicon Valley's most private woman. For once, I didn't mind the attention. It wasn't vanity, it was release. People weren't just hearing about numbers and technology anymore. They were hearing about why Avalon existed. The next morning, my phone rang while I was reviewing emails. It was my father. I answered immediately. Dad. There was a pause, then a deep breath on the other end. I saw your speech, he said. His voice was quiet but clear. You spoke beautifully. Thank you, I said softly. I didn't realize how much you carried, he continued. All those years, I thought I was shielding you from my failures. I never saw that you were shielding me from your success. I smiled through the lump in my throat. We were both trying to protect each other, I guess. He chuckled faintly. Seems like it. Your mother would have been proud. No, she is proud. The warmth in his voice melted something inside me that had been frozen for years. Dad, I said quietly, you taught me to build things that last. Maybe now we can rebuild us, too. There was a long silence, the kind that didn't need words. I'd like that, he said finally. After the call, I sat in my office for a long while, letting his words settle. Outside, the fog had lifted, revealing a clear blue sky. It felt symbolic, like a curtain had finally been pulled away from my life. Over the next few weeks, things began to change. Investors admired not just my leadership, but my honesty. Employees said they felt prouder to work for Avalon. Even strangers sent letters, saying my story gave them courage to face their own hidden truths. And yet, through all of it, I stayed grounded, visiting my father every weekend, cooking dinners in the same old kitchen where I once dreamed of escape. We didn't talk much about money anymore. Instead, we talked about simple things: Mom's favorite recipes, Diego's plans after graduation, the future. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, my father turned to me. You know, he said, I used to think success meant never falling. Now I think it means learning to stand up together. I smiled, feeling the weight of years lift. Then I guess we're finally succeeding. He laughed, really laughed, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like home again. A year later, life felt like it had finally learned how to breathe again. The noise, the pressure, the chaos of the past seemed to have faded into something softer, like the memory of a storm that had once torn through your world but left the air cleaner afterward. Avalon Digital was stronger than ever. Our IPO had been a success, not just financially, but in spirit. Employees walked through the halls with a kind of shared pride, a sense that we weren't just building software, we were building meaning. Every decision, every product launch, every initiative was guided by something deeper than profit, honesty. It had become our new foundation. I'd started a program called the Vasquez Initiative, a non-profit branch of Avalon dedicated to funding small family businesses affected by financial loss, restaurants, bakeries, shops like my father's once was. Every time a grant was approved, I thought of him, of the nights he'd fallen asleep over unpaid bills while pretending everything was fine. This, I realized, was my way of rewriting that story, not for me, but for families like ours who deserved another chance. My father, meanwhile, had transformed in his own quiet way. The shame that once haunted his eyes had faded, replaced by calm acceptance. He'd reopened a small restaurant, not a chain this time, but a cozy place called Maria's Table, named after my mother. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about love, about the joy of feeding people and seeing them smile. Every Friday night, I drove down to Palo Alto to have dinner there. It became our ritual. Diego usually joined us too, full of stories from his new job in investment banking. My father would tease him about being the family capitalist, and Diego would grin, claiming he was just trying to be like his big sister. Sometimes, I'd help Dad in the kitchen, chopping vegetables, wiping tables, humming softly as he cooked. And every so often, customers would recognize me. "Are you Elena Vasquez from Avalon?" they'd ask, wide-eyed. Dad would smile proudly before I could even answer. "That's my daughter," he'd say, his voice carrying the pride he once hid so carefully. "She's the one who built Avalon, and she still helps her old man with the dishes." We'd laugh, and for a moment, it felt like time folded in on itself, the past and present merging into something whole. One night, after closing, I found myself sitting on the patio behind the restaurant. The stars above were bright, scattered across the velvet sky. My father came out with 2 cups of coffee and handed me one. "You know," he said, sitting beside me, "I used to think losing everything was the worst thing that could happen to me. And now?" I asked, smiling faintly. "Now I think it was the best. Because it gave me you, not the daughter I thought I had, but the woman I never realized you'd become." I looked at him, the man who had once been my hero, then my silence, and now, finally, my friend. "We both had to lose something to find each other again," I said quietly. He nodded, gazing up at the stars. "Your mother used to say life doesn't break you to punish you, it breaks you open so light can get in." I swallowed hard. She was right. The night breeze was gentle, carrying the faint scent of garlic and herbs from the kitchen. Inside, the staff was cleaning up, laughter echoing faintly. The world felt smaller, simpler, not because it had shrunk, but because I had stopped running from it. In the months that followed, I started writing, not code this time, but a memoir. Not for fame or publicity, but for truth. I called it The Quiet Architect, because that's what I had been all along, building lives quietly, until I realized that silence can only protect you for so long. The book became a symbol of release, for me, for my father, for anyone who had ever hidden their strength out of love. When it was published, I sent the first signed copy to my father. He read it cover to cover in 2 days. Then he called me. "Elena," he said, his voice full of emotion. I didn't know words could build something stronger than buildings. "They can," I said softly, "if they're honest." There was a pause, then he added, "Your mother would have been proud." I smiled through tears. That's all I ever wanted. Time moved gently after that. The sharp edges of the past softened into stories we could finally laugh about. Avalon thrived, Maria's Table became a community favorite, and our family, once fractured by silence, became whole again, stitched together by truth. One evening, as I stood on the balcony of my San Francisco penthouse, looking out at the glittering city below, I realized something profound. Success wasn't the view from above, it was the ability to look down and still see where you came from, without shame. The fog rolled in slowly, curling around the towers, wrapping the city in its soft embrace. For years, I had thought of that fog as a symbol of confusion, of the things I couldn't say, the truths I couldn't face. But now, it felt different. It wasn't hiding me anymore. It was holding me. My phone buzzed with a message from my father. "Dinner tomorrow? I'm making Mom's lemon chicken. Bring that new sauce recipe of yours, the one that's too fancy for normal people." I laughed out loud, typing back. "Wouldn't miss it for the world." As I set the phone down, I whispered a quiet thank you to the city, to the people who believed, to the ones who didn't, and to the girl I once was, the one who worked in the dark, not knowing that someday, her truth would be her greatest light. Because in the end, that's what life had taught me. You can spend years building empires out of silence. But the moment you speak your truth, that's when the real foundation begins.